It's been happening a little bit more and more lately, although it hasn't been getting too much attention. Some alleged members of Antifa have been accused not just of some crimes, but actually indicted. There have been arrests, there have been charges. And there was one particular case that caught my attention out of Portland because it comes from someone who's kind of high profile in that she pretends to be a journalist, but it always appeared that she was rooting for Antifa, if not actually participating in some of their illegal behavior. In fact, I wrote about Alyssa Azar for Fox News several months ago on how she photographs streamers, telling her radical Twitter followers to essentially go ahead and harass them. She never does it directly, but the implication has always been that that's what you're supposed to do. It's an attempt to keep people like me and my next guest from actually going out into the field and covering these instances of, we'll call it rioting. Let's just call it for what it is. Joining me on the line is Andy No. Andy, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me on, Jason.
Obviously, you write about this very frequently. You've got a book out that's called Unmasked, Inside Antifa's Radical Plan to Destroy Democracy. Take us through what happened to our good personal friend, Alyssa Azar.
Yeah, so I'm from Portland, and Alyssa Azar lives in the Portland area. I had seen her a number of times through my various on-the-ground field reporting, and early on, it struck me right away. I could tell she wasn't a so-called gonzo journalist, that's how she was described in the local press, because she would wear the same black uniforms as the Antifa comrades, and she was allowed to embed within them. And she was very, very selective in her footage in that whatever she released, she made sure to not show incriminating crimes, even though when I could see her standing in front of crimes and newsworthy things that were being committed. Over the months since, throughout 2020 as the riots carried on, it became very, very clear that this was not somebody who was interested in documenting what was happening, but actually was creating propaganda for Antifa. And in June of this year, she was filmed by another comrade, accidentally filmed, macing a woman standing in a park who was completely nonviolent. Alyssa was part of a group of Antifa comrades who had gone to Oregon City, which is right next to Portland, and there was a riot, there was a brawl in one of the parks against right-wing protesters, conservatives, who had their own separate event. More than half a year later, Ms. Azar was indicted by grand jury just recently in Clackamas County. And this is key, by the way, where the indictment happened. So she's charged with felony rioting and 2 other misdemeanors related to her alleged violent actions that day. Now, if this had been in Multnomah County, where Portland is, the district attorney, Mike Schmidt, probably, based on his record, would have dropped the case. Ms. Azar was arrested earlier in the year in Portland, in Multnomah County, related to another Antifa riot event. And that case was dismissed by Mike Schmidt's office. That was in March of this year. So this is the first time now where she's had charges that actually stick. Mm-hmm. And she immediately went on social media to say that she was merely just defending herself from an assault, and has put out all these links where people can donate money, her OnlyFans account, her PayPal, her Venmo, her Cash App, so on. She opened up a fundraiser on fundraiser.com for her legal defense, and within 24 hours, fundraiser.com had shut down her fundraising because it violates the terms of service. Like GoFundMe, you are not allowed to fundraise if you are facing charges of violent criminality.
What I find curious about all of this is not the only case that is being charged. You had here in Seattle, we talked about this last week, Justin Moore. He is accused of bringing, I believe it was nearly a dozen Molotov cocktails to an Antifa march that was very clearly going to turn into a riot, and it got violent relatively quickly. And this is a guy who's got a track record of doing this kind of thing. At least in one instance in which I reported on earlier in the year, he was the one who, admitted apparently to vandalizing the original Starbucks after, again, an Antifa riot. You have in San Diego prosecutors charging a group of Antifa members or suspected alleged Antifa members or supporters with conspiracy to commit the crime of a riot. And I believe that's the first time that conspiracy has been used against Antifa members. And outside of some regional reporting, not really getting picked up anywhere.
Yeah, so I did a report for Newsweek out of San Diego County. The case was really significant because you have nearly a dozen people who are accused in the criminal complaint of being part of Antifa and being part of different cells. One group from a Los Angeles cell, another from a San Diego area cell, and that they not just conspired to carry out violent, felonious crimes, but actually did engage in it, victimize minors, a journalist. One of the alleged Antifa members was charged with animal cruelty for allegedly maiming and injuring a dog. This was during a riot against Trump supporters earlier this year on the beachfront in Pacific Beach. So that case, if it was anything on the right, this would have been absolutely national coverage. But instead, regardless of this evidence that the district attorney's office in San Diego County has presented to the public, the story has kind of just been swept under. And it's a big deal. 8 of the people a week and a half ago were arrested and arraigned after really massive raids on their various homes. And each of them were charged, their bail was set between $200,000 to $250,000 in all of them, with the exception of one within 24 hours had their bond covered.
Of course. Andy No joining me on the line. He's the author of Unmasked, Inside Antifa's Radical Plan to Destroy Democracy. You should 100% make sure that you purchase this, get some support out for the book. Of course, he's also the editor-at-large over at the Post-Millennial. Do you get a sense, Andy, that things are starting to shift when it comes to actually charging these alleged criminals? Part of the issue is, and I always find this rather amusing that folks on the left won't say anything, but if it were, Proud Boy members or anyone on the right who were showing up very clearly with the intent to either disrupt rallies or create violence and, covering their entire body so that they can't be identified, the left would go crazy. They didn't seem to go crazy when it was Antifa members doing this. But more importantly, to this conversation, that's what makes it so difficult to identify some of these folks, is that they cover up their entire body, including hair, skin color. They wear sunglasses so you can't see what color their eyes are, and it makes it harder to identify.
Yes, and unfortunately, with masking now forced on all of us, that's become a norm, and people don't really bat an eye anymore when you see people covered up to hide their identities. As for whether this is a turn, I think it's too early to tell. I think I would be a bit more encouraged if this was the FBI that had investigated these various crimes and were bringing conspiracy charges at the federal felony level. That would be a big step. We're not seeing that yet. However, I mean, any time one of them gets charged for crimes that they allegedly committed, that's a positive development, because, as you know, people in Seattle and people in Portland know, the overwhelming majority of the time, they're never, ever held accountable. Yeah,
we definitely know that. Final question for you, Andy, is where does this movement stand? What is their next big push? What are they going to fight for?
I think they seem to be just on standby for another George Floyd-like moment that they can seize on. Because the militants themselves are relatively small in numbers, so they have to latch on to larger left-wing protest movements for human shields, for larger legitimacy, and it will happen. All the conditions that laid the ground for 2020 are set to repeat themselves sometime in the future.
Well, hopefully some of them at least will be behind bars when the time comes for them to feel called back into the streets for battle. Andy Ngo, again, is the author of Unmasked, Inside Antifa's Radical Plan to Destroy Democracy. You should purchase it right this moment. Unmasked is the name of the book. Andy, my friend, thank you so much for stopping by, as always. Really appreciate it.
Of course, and if people want to support my independent journalism, please go to ngo.locals.com.
ngo.locals.com. Head on over there now as well to show your support for Andy Ngo. ngo.locals.com. Andy, thank you.